Coming up on this week's show, how you can play Doom to help Ukraine.
A long-lost N64 game is found.
And we talk FMV games with designer Aaron Connors.
The Retro Hour podcast is brought to you each and every week with our wonderful friends at Bitmap Books. Now, one of their books you should definitely check out is Game Boy, the Box Art Collection, a real celebration of the game artwork on the packaging of Nintendo's monochrome Marvel. You can check that out and the rest of their retro gaming books on their website at bitmapbooks.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the Retro Hour podcast, episode number 317. Your weekly dose of retro gaming and technology news with me, Dan Wood.
Me, Ravi Abbott.
And me, Joe Fox.
And welcome to our humble little show that each week takes you behind the scenes on the world of classic video games. Obviously with a healthy dose of nostalgia sprinkled on as well. And we speak to a veteran of the industry on each week's show. Now, bearing in mind we've done 317 episodes of this podcast, it is incredible the amount of people we've talked to from all walks of life, from all different parts of the world, who are all brought together through, this industry that is now the biggest entertainment medium in the world. And I just love hearing the stories about how these games that are now legendary were actually made. To me, don't get me wrong, I love doing the news with you guys that we're going to do in just a moment, but actually hearing from these people that were there like back in the 70s, 80s, 90s working on these games, it's just incredible to hear it.
Oh, I really enjoy it, and we've had some fantastic guests on, but we've got some amazing people. Like recently we've been contacting a lot of people because we're going on holiday, so we've got to kind of get some fantastic guests and not, mess up the kind of schedule that we've got going on.
I don't. We have been working our socks off recently, haven't we? Yeah. I think we've got about 8 interviews we're recording over the next 2 weeks. Some of which are like, I go as far to say, triple A guests who've never maybe done a podcast before. Don't want to tease it too much, but we've got some amazing stuff coming up, haven't we?
We're even doing one from Japan.
We are. But not to take away from our amazing guest this week, Aaron Connors, who he worked on a lot of FMV games, didn't he, Ravi?
Yeah, so he worked on Under a Killing Moon, which is part of the Tex Murphy series, and it was the first kind of multimedia game to come on 4 CDs. It was one of these huge FMV productions, and he also worked on quite a few as well, Spielberg series, a few unreleased games, which were really exciting. Dan, do you know the Tex Murphy series at all?
Well, these works. The original one came out in 1989, and you're right. By the time the third game came out, Under a Killing Moon, 94, that was like a FMV game. What did you say was that 4 CD-ROMs, which, for the time, I remember, a single CD-ROM felt like infinite storage. Never mind that many, so that was quite the achievement. But actually, the way these games developed over just that kind of 5-year period was quite remarkable, really. Because the first game came out on like the Commodore 64 and MS-DOS and the Atari ST. And it's a bit like a spoof kind of, you could say, cross between something like Indiana Jones or Dick Tracy and Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Borrowing a lot of ideas from film noir and cyberpunk kind of games as well. Very tongue-in-cheek games, aren't they, the Tex Murphy games?
Yeah, they've got that kind of element of the old point-and-click games where they're really cheeky, got loads of jokes going on. He's an alcoholic. He's got kind of a different vibe going on. And these series really, really got updated and went to video, FMV. There's been remasters and re-releases of new titles. He's also turned it into novels, so it's kind of been novelized, this series. And really interesting guest. I think you guys are going to enjoy it.
So Aaron Connors, our special guest on the show in around half an hour from now. Now, of course, we have got lots of stories to get into this week. let's jump straight into them. Obviously, we did mention last week that there's a lot going on in the world right now. We like to think of our podcast as, a bit of escapism from everything that's going on, but occasionally there are stories that are that big that, it affects everyone. And of course, the crisis in Ukraine at the moment, that is, headline news. It's on everyone's mind right now. But it is nice to see that the video games industry is getting behind the people of Ukraine and doing whatever they can to support them as well, including the legendary John Romero, who's released his first Doom 2 level since 1994, which is actually all donations are going to the humanitarian causes for the people of Ukraine.
Yeah, so he's released a new level called One Humanity for Doom 2 for €5 with, like you say, 100% of the €5 donation going towards the crisis in Ukraine, which is really cool. And, I was like, I'm sure he did like a pseudo sequel in like 2019 and he did a level in 2016, but they were actually on for Doom 1. This is the first time he's done anything with Doom 2 since 1994, essentially since when he left id. So it's really, really cool. And it actually runs on the original copy of Doom 2, which is really cool. It's like an open source port, and you need to download a .wad file, which contains like a text file to get it working. But I think that's really cool that you can play it on Doom 2 for like your PC, which I just think it's awesome that he's done that as well.
Yeah, Doom fans are going to lap this up, and it's only €5, which is pretty decent. And even if you aren't a Doom fan, it's worth helping out, isn't it? It's for the Red Cross and UN Emergency Response Fund.
And even from a gameplay perspective, I mean, there have been so many kind of third-party and fan-made WAD files released. That was always the appeal of the Doom games, really, that anyone could kind of make a Doom level.
Yeah,
and there have been some wild and weird stuff over the last 25 years. By having John Romero, the guy that made the game, back in the hot seat, designing levels, no one knows the engine like John does. So I think I'm looking forward to playing these. They are available right now from his website, romero.com. You can give them a download from there. Like you said, it's only €5. But I've got a feeling these are going to be really good. I mean, I haven't seen any reviews of them yet, but just from the screenshots, it does look like, kind of return to form if you're a big classic Doom fan back in the day.
I'm very tempted to do this because I recently played through literally from Doom 1 all the way up to like Doom Eternal. Like I did like 1, 2, 3.
What system did you use?
I did it on Xbox One because they were all on Game Pass. So, I'm tempted to just kind of do this just, on my PC. I haven't got it, but I'm tempted to download it, jump on, Romero's shop and, for €5 and going towards charity as well. Even if I don't get it running too well on my computer, I know it's gone to a good cause for 5 minutes of fun for me. But like you say, it does look like a return to form. It does look really, really cool. And, there's like the cyber demons and stuff like that on it as well, which is always awesome.
Joe, you've got to get that running on your modern Windows 10 PC. Back in the 90s, we had to deal with IRQ conflicts and sound card configuration and everything. You've got it easy.
Doom will run on anything.
I'm a console guy. And I'm terrible at anything when it comes to PC. Maybe that could be a funny video, of me trying to get Doom 2 to work on my computer. People just screaming at me like maybe I should like do it like a Twitch or a live stream or something of it.
Yeah, you have to do it all through command line.
Yeah.
See, that is why Joe, even though he's the youngest member of the Retro Hour team, we call him Grandpa Joe.
Yeah, honestly, massive technophobe.
So if you want to get hold of that, like I said, romero.com, definitely worth a download. You're doing it for a great cause, and it looks fantastic levels as well. So I'll put that in this week's show notes too. Now, we always get excited when we see long-lost games finally surfacing, and this is something that looks really weird, actually. For the N64, a prototype of a game called Carnival Senzo's Adventure has surfaced. Now, this was a game from 1999, and I've watched this video that's been uploaded by a YouTube channel called Hardcore Games, and this looks like something out of a Tim Burton movie or something.
It's kind of nightmarish, isn't it?
It is very nightmarish and it is very Tim Burton, but the story behind it is quite interesting. So I had no idea that this existed, let alone that it was based on like a European film that got like a really limited release in 1999. So the film is the same name of the game, Carnival. I keep thinking it's the game Carnival, the light gun game, but it's
But yeah, in that video he pronounces it Carnival, all kinds of different ways.
So
it's got an accent over it. Yeah, it looks like Carnival.
Senzo's Adventure is essentially a animated film where kids get trapped in like an evil carnival, and if they don't escape, they will get turned into like carnival attractions, like rides and stuff like that. And essentially, the game was being made by, Terraglyph Interactive Studios and being published by Vertical Entertainment in 1999. But essentially, they ran out of money when they were making the game, and they unfortunately went bankrupt, and the game never got released. But it was pretty much finished from watching this video. There's a couple of glitches and things like that, but the game, I don't know if you feel the same way, Dan. I know you've watched the video. It feels quite ahead of its time. There's There's a lot going on in it. I mean, it's got that kind of
free roam element in there.
Yeah, it reminded me of like Banjo-Kazooie or Donkey Kong 64 for the N64. That like open world, you can go around like collectible of fun.
It looks like Hogs of War as well. It kind of
it's got that graphical style, but it's got loads of mini games built into it, and it looks like they were really onto something. It's just based on a really obscure IP by the looks of things.
I like the idea of going around a carnival and kind of, playing mini games, and it's a nice concept for
but it's all twisted and evil.
Yeah.
Well, there's even a bit that's like karting, a bit like Mario Kart.
Yeah,
like a racing element.
This is the thing. Like, I mean, there's go-karting in it. There's like, throwing like at the coconuts. There's also like
maze.
There's a hedge maze. There's the giant, the mallet where you hit the mallet and I forget the name of it, but it shoots up and hits the bell. Like the strongman competition. There's all these like Mario Party-esque kind of mini games in the game, but then it's got this big collector fun. Like you got to collect the gold coins and you've got to grind to get the currency so you can then buy items to unlock further areas in the world map. So they were really onto something, and it was very of the time, like I say, like Donkey Kong 64 and stuff like that. But it's definitely something I would have liked to have played when it came out on the N64. But we don't know how it's been found or anything like that. Essentially, Forest of Illusion have put it out, and somebody called Baker64 has got a hold of the ROM and dumped it for everybody to kind of play.
It might be from one of these big leaks. Like, I'm looking at the
I wondered that,
Forest
it
of
doesn't
Illusion
mention it anywhere.
Well, Forest of Illusion, where they've posted it, they've actually posted that they've actually got the cartridge. So it's not come from one of these leaks. They've actually got the plastic. I don't know if you've ever seen a development N64 cartridge, but it's like 2 N64 cartridges, essentially. Like, it's like twice the height of one, if that makes sense. So it's like a really tall N64 cartridge. And then it's literally just got like a sticker on it that says Terraglyph Interactive Studios. And then it's like just got a label at the top which says like NUS 8F, like a code. I would love to know the story of where they've bought it from, if they've bought it in like an auction or, somebody's just found it and sent it to them or something like that. I think
it seems they're kind of doing multiple releases from different systems here. So they've got like Game Boy and Super Famicom.
Oh, did they?
Wii. So they're releasing prototypes, like all types of prototypes on this site, which is pretty cool.
Got you on the site on Forest of Illusion, yeah.
I
thought you meant the game Carnival had like a Wii version.
No.
I was like, what?
They've converted it, Joe.
Yeah.
Can we talk about I haven't seen the film.
No,
like you
I
said,
haven't
it got a
either.
limited release. The main character, what the hell is that about? To me, looking at it reminds me a bit of the first thing, the way I can describe him is, do you remember on Beetlejuice when Alec Baldwin's character like pulls his nose down and pops his eyeballs out?
Well, this is the interesting thing. I've only done very minimal research of the film, lots of research on the game, as always, but there were several children who get trapped in the carnival. So I believe he is only one of like 3 or 4 characters from the film. So
it looks like an old man, though.
He does look like a 40-year-old man. He
child.
does like, he's like balding and stuff, but
He looks like Abe from Abe's Odyssey a bit.
But I think I'm going to have a guess that he would have been one of several characters you unlock. So like in Donkey Kong 64, you just start with Donkey Kong, but as you unlock more of the game, you unlock all the different other monkeys and apes, and eventually you end up with like 5 characters and they all have their own abilities. So like this guy's got like a pea shooter and he's got like his own particular go-kart, whereas in like the go-karting bits, he's like racing against the other kids who have all got their own different go-karts. So I imagine as the game kind of goes on, you unlock the other kids, but I don't think the build that we've got a hold of has that part of it in. I could be wrong, it's just speculation, but just from playing those kind of games, that's kind of what happened, and just from looking at the film, because he is a very odd-looking character, like you say.
Yeah.
When there's other kids they could have based it on in the film.
So if you want to play it, actually, they've uploaded the ROM file to the 64history.net website. I'll put a link in the show notes. If you've got an EverDrive, which I have, there is a prototype ROM that you can download that I imagine will play on there. So always interesting to kind of get a glimpse on games that didn't make it to market, I think, isn't it? Especially ones that are in this state where they look almost finished.
Yeah, definitely.
So,
and it's a nice-looking game as well.
Yeah, I'm glad they actually get released rather than kept in somebody's hands, like locked away.
Well, we've been talking about Metal Slug recently. Now, this is a cool little video uploaded by Retro Game Force looking at Metal Slug Warfare for the Sega Mega Drive, and this looks very impressive.
Yeah, this is Metal Slug Warfare demo version 2.2a, which I've seen posted on a channel called Retro Game Force, and I don't feel like this has got enough love. You know, I've not seen it too much on the internet. You know,
you're the only person that I've actually heard it from.
Yeah, so I think this really looks really, really cool. So this has been uploaded by a Studio Vitir, which I believe is a Spanish studio, who have made this for the Mega Drive, and on the channel Retro Game Force, they've got their hands on it and they're playing it. And, you know, it works on EverDrive, so you just download it, stick it on your Mega Drive EverDrive, but there's nothing else going on or anything like that. Because when I first saw it and I sent it over to Ravi, I hadn't watched the video yet, and I was like, oh, there must be some crazy stuff going on, you know, to get it running or whatever. But there isn't. It is literally a port of Metal Slug. So it's not quite a full port. It's like a one-level version. So it's based on the original Metal Slug, and you can only play as one character, which is the guy in the red jacket with the blonde hair. I think his name's Marco. I'm not 100%.
Yeah, it's like a side-scrolling one. And,
that all the Metal Slug games are like that.
But it's kind of a bit more zoomed in than usual.
Yeah, it is a little bit more zoomed in, and the sprites are a little bit bigger and a little bit less detailed, and the colour palette is, I would say, a little bit duller than it is on like the Neo Geo and the arcade.
Maybe that is maybe because they've just converted it over quickly.
Yeah,
and, like, you know, they might be able to touch up.
Yeah, but I think what's really interesting about it is it's not quite the full game. It's kind of like a mini game where it's just one level that you're on, and it's just a case of get a high score, just kill as many enemies as possible, which I think is probably the best they could do in terms of compressing it and getting, you know, the assets onto the Mega Drive, and it's still sounding good.
Yeah, but you're not going to have the huge kind of tank going in there.
Yeah, you're not going to with the like massive bosses and stuff, because ultimately, Metal Slug was on 32-bit hardware. It was on 32-bit. It got ported to like the PlayStation, and you know, in Japan it was ported to the Sega Saturn and stuff like that. It was never meant for like, you know, 16-bit hardware. But the fact that they've got it running, and it's even got some really good, like, you know, like the voice synthesizer on it. It's got that proper Mega Drive feel to it. But
nice.
it is Metal Slug. Like, I'm a fan of Metal Slug, and you look at it and you can hear it, and the sound effects and everything are Metal Slug. So I think this needs some love.
It's very smooth as well, the scrolling.
Yeah,
isn't it?
It's really smooth. It's not got the greatest frame rate, but that being said, the original kind of like two Metal Slugs for the Neo Geo, like, you know, for the arcades, they actually had loads of slowdown and like quite low frame rates on them. So I will give them that. And considering they've had to cut quite a lot, and you only ever get a couple of enemies on screen, you do still get all the guns. Like, you get like the rocket launcher, the homing launcher, like the machine gun, like you even get the double Uzi and stuff like that. So pretty impressed with it. And, you know, there's a few frames of animation in, like, you know, where you kill the enemies and stuff like that, what they've had to cut. But you've got to kind of pinch yourself and remind yourself that it's running on the Mega Drive.
Yeah, and it's not like emulated or anything. They're saying it's been captured with the OS SC, and you know, it's real hardware. So,
well, this is a 1 megabyte download, so you can put that on your EverDrive, play it on there, or, you know, your favourite Mega Drive / Genesis emulator. I love the fact as well, I mean, they are selling this on their website, which is, I'll put in the show notes, vatia.itch.io. It's one of those name your own price downloads, which I think is always cool. So, I mean, you know, it's only a demo version, like you said, but the fact that when people do great fan projects like this, obviously a lot of time has gone into this. And we've talked about a lot of fan games on the show over the last 6 years. This is one of the best I've seen, I think. The amount of effort that must have gone into this. I think it is always good to support these indie studios, isn't it? And, you know, encourage them to do more.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you want to download that, definitely worth a look in. If you're a fan of Metal Slug and you want to play it on your Mega Drive, I'll put that in our show notes along with all the rest of the stories at theretrohour.com. A little reminder that the only way we can bring you the Retro Hour podcast every week and bring you our amazing guests is thanks to our incredible supporters on Patreon. Now, we do have that running at the moment. If you want to back us on there, load of perks, isn't there, Joe, for being a fan of the show on Patreon?
Loads and loads of perks. One of my favourite ones, is you do get to hang out with us once a month. We have the Patreon hangout, usually on the...
No. We get to hang out with them.
We get to hang out with them. Even better. There we go. Dan's a better salesman than me. But yeah, one of my favourite things is we do the Patreon hangout, which we do once a month on a Sunday night where we kind of all get together. And it's kind of like Ravi always says, it's like kind of like a bit of a user group.
Yeah. It's kind of like a bit of a pub as well, isn't it?
Yeah. We all have a crack a drink open and kind of talk about what games we've been playing and what we've been buying recently. And we don't always talk about retro games, often talk about films and old mobile phones and stuff like that. But then one of the other things we do, which I absolutely love, is our second podcast, which I always think we've only done like 5 or 6 episodes to, but I think we've done 20 episodes of it now, which is
20, God.
20, yeah.
22, I think.
Is it 22? There we go, which is the Retro Hour After Hours. So if you're one of our gold tier patrons, you do get access to the Retro Hour After Hours, where we do all sorts on that. We do a little bit of behind the scenes, a little bit of extra content with like some of our guests. We've recently had Ian Grieve, who did an entire second episode for us, which should actually be his 3rd episode that he's done for the Retro Hour, which is just
his value for money.
His value for money, Ian Greaves. But we also do the retro years, where we spent a lot of time talking through like our lives in gaming, and
and you also get an ad-free episode as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Even doing the silver tier, you get ad-free episode, and sometimes you get the episodes a little bit early. Some weeks
bonus content in there.
Bonus content in there as well. So yeah, we're trying to make it worthwhile for people, and we do massively appreciate it. And the last couple of months we have been pushing it because it was a little bit slower, but we're obviously doing something right, because we've had a lot of people sign up this week, which we absolutely massively appreciate. Because of, as Dan says, it does keep the show independent and it does keep the show running. Which we're forever thankful for, because of, I don't know about you guys, but doing the show does keep me sane from my 9 till 5.
There's not much in life that keeps me sane, but doing this podcast definitely does. So, we hugely appreciate any support we get on that. I mean, it starts from I think it's like £3 a month or something, price of a cup of coffee. So if you'd like to back us on Patreon, all the details are at theretrohour.com. And everyone that supports us on there, of course, finds their place in the most prestigious high score table in the world of retro gaming, the Retro Hour Hall of Fame. And a massive thank you to our latest supporters, Steve House,
Harry Viking,
Sebastian Kiernan,
Derek Young,
and Owen Lister,
who all backed us on Patreon over the last couple of weeks. We hugely appreciate that, guys. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to join them, as I said, all the details are at theretrohour.com, and we'll see you on the next Patrons Hangout. Right then, some more news stories before we chat to our special guest, Aaron Connors. Now, have you ever had a MIDI interface on your PC, Ravi, for those kind of old school games that you used? I always think they sound incredible when I see like LGR doing videos.
I don't think outside of a museum I've actually heard one. Like, I always wanted one, but there wasn't much support on the Amiga for like the MIDI devices as well. But yeah, the MT32 is an absolutely amazing one. And this is a little device which is a Raspberry Pi Zero that emulates an MT32.
Yeah, this is crazy. Now, the thing I always love about hearing, I mean, it was more on PCs, like you said, wasn't it? And when you've heard like something like, Monkey Island or a lot of those kind of old LucasArts adventure games being played on a MIDI synthesizer, they just sound so much better than something like a Sound Blaster. Really takes it to another level. Because, these MIDI synths are like real instruments, aren't they?
Yeah.
And a lot of games, particularly that came out from like the mid-90s onwards on PCs, would take advantage of these. And you could really have a full orchestra in a box playing the soundtrack.
Monkey Islands is the great example of that. If you actually look up on YouTube and hear the Roland MT32 version of kind of Monkey Island, it's absolutely beautiful. So it's really cool, this little piece of hardware, and it's using a Raspberry Pi Zero kind of all built into one case, like a little enclosure. It's got a display on there, volume select, you can go in and out of your MIDI. It's 3D printed, and yeah, I'm pretty impressed by this. I don't know, is there a kind of supply demand issue with Raspberry Pi Zeros at the moment?
Well, everything seems to be, because of the component shortage right now. I'm not sure whether Raspberry Pi Zeros are hard to get hold of, but there are a lot of them out there. I think, most people listening to our show probably got 2 or 3 in a drawer somewhere.
Didn't they come free with a magazine at one point?
Yeah, I think you might be right. Yeah, Magpie magazine. Yeah, we're trying to find them. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Searching every newsagent in Nottingham. Yeah, that was a fun weekend. But yeah, this is really cool. This is a guy called Dale Winham. Now, he's from Newcastle. He's actually a PhD candidate studying computer science and game technology. So he's got a bit of spare time, and he's really into vintage computers and his retro. So if you're listening, Dale, great work on this. And this is going to blow your mind, Ravi. The Raspberry Pi just celebrated its 10th birthday.
Oh, wow. Yeah, definitely.
Last month. So, and to celebrate that, he thought, what better way than to, use it for his retro hobby. And like you said, what he's really done here, he's made a Roland MT32 inside a Raspberry Pi, which is actually very timely because I was looking not long ago for, Roland MT32s and other kind of synths as well to kind of get that. Because I've got, a couple of old PCs. I've got a Pentium 1 and a 486, and I thought it might be a nice addition to it.
I think they're quite hard to get.
Oh, they were like, the cheapest one I could find was about £300, and that didn't look in very good condition. So I think there is definitely a demand, for kind of, MS-DOS kind of gamers of that era who really want this kind of thing. And
it says it will connect here to FPGA Mister. Also, the classic computers and arcade boards. So you can actually use it on the older systems and the originals as well, not just some emulated system.
Yeah, I guess if it's compatible with MIDI is a standard, isn't it?
Yeah.
So if it works with that, it should work on anything that supports MIDI. So really cool little project. I mean, again, the fact that Raspberry Pi is 10 years old. I love that interview that we did with Eben Upton a couple of years ago, talking about the history of the Raspberry Pi. And it's, again, this week I turned my Raspberry Pi 400 into my dream high-end Amiga setup using something called AmiKit. I'm going to release a video on YouTube this week showing that. But they've just got so many possibilities. And I think the fact that the retro community's really taken the Raspberry Pi under their wing over the last decade, and we'll still see incredible innovative projects like this. It's fantastic. So if you want to read more about that, it's all on GitHub, of course. And that's another great thing about that community. It's often all open source.
Yeah, there is a problem there, though, that the ROMs for the MT32 are actually copyrighted. But, you can get them if you actually buy a ROM. And,
where there's a will, there's a way, really.
Yeah.
So, we'll link that guide. It's a great little article on Tom's Hardware in our show notes. Now, what about this? I know you're very excited about this, Joe. You've been itching to talk about this one. House of the Dead is getting a remake, of course, and a new trailer has landed, and we've got a release date for it now as well.
I kid you not. So we spoke about this last year on the show when it was literally just like a 30-second long teaser trailer.
Yeah.
I think it was Nintendo Direct last year that they were like, House of the Dead remake's coming to the Switch. So Nintendo Direct this year, we now got a little bit more information because it was just saying coming in 2021, and obviously it never came. And I'm not going to lie, I'm a little bit obsessed with House of the Dead games, and I found myself Googling House of the Dead remake quite often to see when it was coming out. Daily routine, wake up in the morning, brush my teeth, Google House of the Dead remake. But yeah, finally, we actually have a final trailer for it, which gives us a lot more kind of a view of the game and, what it's going to be doing. And, it's a remake of House of the Dead. That's, that's all we need, really. And, really nice graphics and awesome, soundtrack and stuff like that by the sounds of things. But it's coming out April 7th on the Switch, and it's up for pre-order from March 31st. Absolutely gutted because I'm going on holiday the last week of March, so I would have loved to have had it and blasted it all that week. But yeah, it looks...
Are you going to get physical then?
I don't know. They haven't said if it's physical or not. I've got a feeling that with pre-orders only being from the 31st and it coming out on the 7th, I've got a feeling it's going to be digital only.
See, why do they do pre-orders on digital? Because there's an unlimited supply.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a bit of a strange one, but I've Googled it and there doesn't seem to be much information at the point of us recording this, like if there is going to be a physical one. But no doubt with it being on the Switch, we probably get one from what are they called? Limited Run. I'm sure they will.
How do you shoot things on the Switch then? Is it like touchscreen or D-pad or?
So the Joy-Cons actually work like Wiimotes.
Yeah, the Joy-Cons work like Wii remotes. Like, the old Wii remotes, so you can shoot the screen with them from what I understand. Okay. And, you have a little cursor on the screen so you know where you're shooting, because then they're not... I found that they're not quite as accurate as, like, light guns, but they definitely do the trick.
But there's that Sinden light gun as well, which if this is released on another system, maybe that'll be compatible.
Yeah, it doesn't say it's exclusively for the Switch. I keep seeing like landing on the Switch first, that kind of language being used. So, watch the space. It might come out on some other consoles. But yeah, really looking forward to this one. But, so far what we know is that we've got the arcade classic with modern graphics and modern controls. True to the original gameplay, it's saying local 2-player multiplayer with multiple endings, and then it's like always photo mode and achievements, and there's an armory with unlockable weapons which you didn't get in the first game. It wasn't until the later games that you start getting like shotguns and machine guns and stuff like that. And it does say that there's a new game mode with hordes of undead monsters, so I'm assuming a horde mode on there as well. So I'm really hoping. I don't think it's going to be the case. I'm really hoping that you unlock the original on the game as well. Like once you complete it, it's like, here's the original from like 96 you can play as well, or
or the old school graphics.
Yeah, or even just a filter so you can play it with like the original arcade graphics, like Sega Saturn graphics. I'd love that. Or even more, what I would love is you complete it and then it's like, actually number 2 and 3 are on here as well, or something like that. Nothing like that announced as of yet.
He always wants more, doesn't he?
I do always want more. I'm never satisfied.
Like looking at the trailer, it does seem a bit blurry. Yeah, like maybe it's the capture software that they've used to put it up there or something, but you think this is the main trailer. It does seem a bit blurry, and the kind of, the gun overlay and stuff like that isn't the best kind of.
I think it's just the graphical style.
You think they've gone for the kind of that deliberate look?
Yeah, I think I don't know the name of the look, but me and my wife recently have been playing a lot of indie games on Game Pass. Completely different genres of games and stories of games. Like we've been playing It Takes Two and A Way Out and some other indie games like I can't remember the name of it, but like one where you sail on the ocean. And my wife, who's she's a big gamer, but she doesn't like analyze games like we do. And she said a lot of these modern games all seem to have this really bright, blurry look to them.
Yeah.
Like it's like a stylized, over stylized look, which I think is just what they're going for. I don't think it's a case of all the game looks purposely blurry, if that makes sense. It's just,
and probably on the monitor, it's going to look a lot different on the Switch.
Yeah, on the Switch and stuff. But yeah, really excited for this. I posted it on our socials last week. And a couple of friends of the show were like, bet Joe's excited for this. And I was just there, like, rubbing my hands together, going, yeah, I am.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, I'm really looking forward to that one.
So, the House of the Dead, I mean, that in my mind, that's kind of, I know, obviously, you love Resident Evil as well. They're kind of the two games in my mind that kind of cemented that kind of zombie video game genre.
It was like the grown-up kind of version of, after Time Crisis and Virtua Cop and stuff. You're like, oh, I'm going to go and play House of the Dead. That's a bit dark,
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I always end up talking about Resident Evil. Resident Evil is like my favourite game series of all time, and there's a much bigger lore there than there is with House of the Dead. There's only a handful of House of the Dead games, but I'm loving that we are getting, a remake of it, because if there hasn't been anything House of the Dead. There was a recent arcade game about 3 or 4 years ago, which I have played. But other than that, there hasn't really been anything like console-wise since like House of the Dead Overkill, which was like 2009 now. And I think House of the Dead...
Is that on the PS3?
Yeah, on the PS3 and the Wii.
Yeah.
House of the Dead 4, the arcade game, was on like the PS3 eShop. But that is literally it. So we've not had anything on home console, for 10, 11, 12 years. So loving that it's getting a bit of love. Wanting more from it, hoping that there's more games on there rather than just the first one, but we'll see. I'm sure I'll be grabbing it and playing it.
It's interesting. How did you play it? Originally, I mean, I know you always play it on arcade. When we,
I originally, spending all my holiday money, like whenever we'd go to like Benidorm, it'd be in the arcades when I was like a young boy. But I actually had the first 2 games on PC, so I used to play it with a mouse, like when I was in school, and absolutely loved it. And then I have House of the Dead on the Sega Saturn, the original like port of it, which is actually a really quite rare, expensive game now, which I didn't realise until recently. But that's got a lot of loading screens in it, like even in the game. Like you'd run around a corner and there'd be a loading screen, like just like in the middle of the level.
Oh, wow. So
it wasn't the best port, and it graphically wasn't very nice. But then obviously House of the Dead 2 for the Dreamcast, and then also for the Wii, there was a House of Dead 2 and 3 double pack. that came out early in the Wii's life, which I was only playing at Christmas. Me and my wife always crank that out and play through House of the Dead 2 and 3 like back to back. Like every year, we'll do it like once or twice.
That control system as well. I mean, we always talk about the fact that we love light gun games, but it's hard to get a light gun on a modern display. But then, the more I think about it, there are more ways to play these light gun games. You've got stuff like, the Joy-Cons or the Wiimotes. And
they're not,
I'm
as
gonna
accurate, though. Like, it's...
True.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I agree. But there is one thing that actually, in the last couple of weeks, even though I said I wasn't going to do it, you guys know, I bought myself an Oculus Rift 2.
Oh, God.
Oh, yeah.
Even though I keep saying, I'm over VR, I thought, well, we keep talking about it on the show. I got hold of one. And I was actually playing it the other day, and I thought the hand controls that you've got on those, I thought the light gun games would be amazing
Quest?
on this. Sorry, the Oculus Quest 2. Sorry, the latest one. I was playing that the other day, and I thought, what an amazing machine that would be for like light gun games. Imagine something like House of the Dead in VR.
Oh, God.
You need to get your hand on a Super Hot Dan.
I've got it, I've got it on the PlayStation VR. Really good. But I just thought, wouldn't it be an easy win for them to release a lot of these old school kind of, shooter games on there, the light gun games on
Yeah,
on VR.
I mean, they did it on the Wii, like you say, like what just kind of set that discussion off then is that a lot of these games did get released on the Wii in like 2007, 2008. So, they are probably missing a trick, but I don't know if it's just there's a lot of licensing issues, and obviously Sega own the rights and licenses to a lot of these games. So I don't know if it's an issue there, but yeah, that would be pretty incredible.
I'd love to do a Virtua Cop in like VR.
I mean, even if they had it
all
like
those enemies,
not like fully VR, but even if it was like VR as in you're just standing in front of an arcade machine in the VR shooting the screen of an arcade
I've
machine.
seen lots of software that kind of has the arcade units, and you go down on it in VR, like down the arcades, you have a custom setup there.
I'm sure Ravi could mod my Oculus so I can sideload those games on it if I give it to him for a weekend. So, very cool to see these old light gun games being playable again. So if you want to check out the trailer, I'll put that and everything else we talked about in our news this week. You'll find it all on your podcast app or in our show notes at theretrohour.com. Now, just before we chat, lots of classic FMV games with our special guest this week. Aaron Collins is coming up in just a moment. This podcast is sponsored by our good friends at BetterHelp Online Therapy. Now, of course, we all get times in life when, it could be a relationship that you're going through. I've had friends recently that have gone through redundancy and kind of, the stress that takes on you as well. There are people that we care about, friends and family as well. But the thing is, we often don't look inside and think about how we have to care for ourselves, do we? We often spend a lot of time caring about our friends and family, but really, everyone needs a bit of help from time to time.
Oh, absolutely. And something that really resonated with me once was, imagine if you bought a car, but then you found out that's the only car that you could have for the rest of your life. You would massively take care of it. You would look after that car. You'd get it cleaned every week and stuff like that. It's the exact same with our mind. We only get one go at life. We only get one go with your body and your mind. So why don't we take care of it the same way we would if it was your only ever car you're going to get in life? So going to therapy and stuff like that, it isn't necessarily, I don't see it as like, oh, it's a way to fix yourself before you're broken or like after you've been broken. It can be a way to prevent you from becoming broken or a way to make yourself better if you are feeling a little bit under the weather or a little bit poorly in your mind, and there's absolutely no issue with it whatsoever.
I think you're right there, because a lot of our audience will resonate. The minute your PC starts to glitch a little bit or something, you get that repaired straight away. You'll buy a new graphics card or whatever.
That's probably, like you say, it's probably better, a better
analogy.
Analogy.
Well, our friends this month at BetterHelp Online Therapy, it's a good time right now just to think, we want you to take care of the most important relationship, the one that you have with yourself as well. And BetterHelp is online therapy that offers so many different options. It can be video, phone, even live chat sessions with your therapist. You don't have to be on camera if you don't want to. And obviously, it is a lot more affordable than doing this in person as well. So I think that is one misconception that people have, that therapy is just for rich people or celebrities. A lot of people think it's kind of out of their grasp, really, don't they? A bit too expensive. But with this, it is a lot more affordable than doing it in person. And you'll get matched with a therapist in under 48 hours. So you can give it a try and find out why over 2 million people have used BetterHelp Online Therapy. So this week's show is sponsored by BetterHelp, and because we want you to get started with this and try it out for yourself, our listeners are going to get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/retro. So use our exclusive link so they know that we sent you and get 10% off your first month. That is betterhelp.com/retro. And a big thank you to our friends at BetterHelp for their support of our show. And next, we're going to get some incredible stories about classic games, including, of course, the Tex Murphy franchise, old school FMV games as well, with our special guest, Aaron Connors, is next on the Retro Hour podcast. You're listening to the Retro Hour podcast, and it is time for the main event then, when we welcome on our very special guest. And we're really excited to talk to this week's guest about the classic Tex Murphy games and the early FMV era that I always find really interesting as well. So let's welcome on our special guest this week, Aaron Connors. How you doing?
I'm excellent. Thank you very much.
Really appreciate you joining us. Now, before we get into the stories of the, incredible companies and the games that you've worked on, it's always quite interesting to kind of get a bit of a background on our guests' geek credentials, as it were, how it all started. So what's kind of the first story in a game that really caught your imagination then, going right back to your earliest days?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So I go way, way back to the kind of classic arcade games is what I grew up with. So I was the kid hanging out, in the lobby with a pocket full of quarters, playing Ms. Pac-Man and Donkey Kong and Tron and games like that. And so I hadn't really encountered a game with a story in it until I started working in the industry. And then all of a sudden I got exposed to some of the new things that were going on, one of which was the game that had just been published by Access Software, which is called Countdown. And I'm not sure how many people would even remember that, but it had just the most immersive environment, had a really compelling kind of John le Carre spy story to it. And I was just in love. I was just like, holy crap, I can make games with stories like this. And I actually just kind of stumbled into it so early that I got a chance to actually do it before I got to really appreciate a lot of other people's work.
And that game looks really like Darkseid or something like that, and it's got a kind of point and click driven engine. Did you know about any of the text adventures before, or any of the kind of choose your own adventure books?
So I grew up with the choose your own adventure books. In addition to the regular books I read, which all influenced me, like Sherlock Holmes and Hardy Boys and things like that. But the choose your own adventure concept was just fascinating to me. The idea that it could play out in all these different ways, which of course ultimately ended up being kind of the inspiration for the Pandora Directive and the narrative paths we put together for that. So yeah, that's always been first and foremost. In fact, Ravi and I were talking before we came on the air about the Bandersnatch Black Mirror episode, and just how cool it was to see something like that being done today. So there's still a lot of interest in it.
Well, you also created board games as a kid. What kind of stuff were you making, and were they totally original ideas or mashups of existing games?
Well, it's hard not to be inspired when you grow up with board games, because obviously, growing up in the late 60s, early 70s, you didn't have any kind of video game. So for me, I think games like Life, which, allowed you to kind of follow this path around and divert off into different things. There was one game called Careers, which most people haven't even heard of, but I love that game because you basically chose what your goals in life are going to be. And I think it was money, fame, and love. And so you would say up front, I want, of my 100 points I need to achieve, I want 50 of them to be love and 30 to be fame and 20 to be money. And then as you played the game, you would try to achieve objectives that would earn you those points. And those all kind of tie into this interactive approach to game design.
Sounds very like the Sims, which you did a little bit,
yeah.
Like.
But the board games that I made were all over the place because I'm a big sports guy. I grew up playing baseball, basketball, and so I made a bunch of sports games and I made a bunch of adventure games. There was are you guys familiar with the game Husker Du?
No.
So Husker Du was basically a matching game. So you had a game board, and then underneath the game board you had a disc, and the game board was covered with like 32 holes. And when you rotated the disc, it would change the position of matching symbols. And then you would cover those discs, and then you'd basically, each turn you'd pick up 2 of the discs. And if they had a matching character, then you would remove those and you'd play until you'd found all the matches. And so I use that concept for randomization for an adventure game. And so I created this kind of Lord of the Rings type environment that had all different types of, swamps and forests and deserts and things like that. And then I would use that Husker Du concept where you would find objects or encounter enemies, and they would be hidden underneath these discs that you would pick up when you encountered them. And so, if you played it long enough, you'd start to recognize the pattern of the layouts because you only had so many to work with. But that randomization was a big part of that experience. And obviously, when you got into video games, that was kind of done programmatically. But I always love that idea that you take a basic concept of start here, end here, and go through a bunch of obstacles, but those obstacles change each time you play.
Well, it sounds like you had a really active imagination as a kid. And I mean, did you want to go into screenwriting then? And what kind of experience of that did you have?
It's funny to think about now, but obviously as a kid, I dreamed of being a professional baseball player. I wanted to be first baseman for the Red Sox was my dream.
Right.
And unfortunately, I didn't have the ability to get that far, even though I loved it. And so I actually was leaning toward becoming a statistician, because I love baseball statistics. And so I actually loved math and wanted to kind of go in that direction. So it was almost the opposite of being creative. But as it turned out, I actually had a knack for creative writing, which I just discovered doing my assignments at school. And when I was in high school, I had a literature teacher who told me that if I didn't become a writer, that it would be a real shame. And that was always a huge inspiration for me. And so the fact that I ended up just stumbling into the opportunity to combine the creative writing aspect with design and game design in particular was just incredibly fortuitous.
Well, I was wondering, did you have any formal training, or did you work with any actors or any of that kind of experience?
No, it was all on the job training. In fact, what got me the opportunity with Access Software, and Chris Jones in particular, who was the CFO of Access at the time, was that throughout college, I had written these interactive murder mysteries. And so there's a board game, or a type of board game called How to Host a Murder Mystery. And I had gone to a party where they played that. And I thought that was really fun, but I could do it better. And so I started writing my own interactive mysteries where everyone who came to the party would have been assigned a character to play prior to coming, and give them their information about their character. And then when they showed up, we would just kind of introduce the case, and people would just start talking and trying to figure out the mystery. And I'd done about a dozen of those while I was in college. And so when I got hired at Access, I told Chris about this, and he had me bring one of them in. And so we went through it, and he loved it. And he said, "Hey, how would you like to co-design Under a Killing Moon with me?" And that's literally how I got the job.
Wow, I remember how popular those were as well, those kind of murder mystery nights, people would put them on, yeah. And often it wouldn't be an amazing storyline, would it?
Yeah, the quality of the stories varied somewhat, but for me it was, I also liked the theme aspect of it, right? So we'd want people to come in costume, so I'd pick a particular time period that lend itself to some good costumes. And so I also tried to bring people together from different social circles so they wouldn't know each other necessarily. And that really added to it, because they would actually interact with each other as the characters more so than as friends. In fact, I remember I would introduce people at a murder mystery party, and they'd call each other by their character names for a while until they got used to who they really were. So it was just a lot of fun.
I mean, it sounds like a lot of the stuff you're doing here was quite, analog based. I mean, were you much of a computer guy at this stage? And what kind of hardware did you have at home?
I was a total Luddite. I mean, I resisted using a word processor. I was still using typewriters in college. Electric, but, still. And so it took me a while before I actually kind of warmed up to even using WordPerfect. So, no, I was not a computer guy at all, which just adds to the fact of how random it was that I actually got hired and put into a game design position with a computer company, because I barely knew how to turn the thing on. So absolutely learned on the job with that as well.
You know, when you joined Access then, I mean, were you aware of the company and any of the games beforehand then, or was it all kind of new to you?
All new to me. I didn't even realize how big the industry was at that point because, again, I didn't have a PC. I didn't play video games. And as it turned out, I had a friend that I'd gone to high school with, and we had a few classes together, and we were neighbors, and so we knew each other fairly well. And I swear, I think this is the whole reason any of this happened was we had a chemistry class together, and I hated chemistry. It was like the worst subject for me. And our teacher was terrible. And so just to keep myself from going insane, I started writing this like epic poem about our teacher and the crazy experiments he would do. And I'm a terrible artist, but I do little drawings. And so every day I would just add to this like epic poem. And by the end of the semester, I think it was about 15 pages long. And it was pretty funny and interesting. And my friend who sat next to me in the class just loved it. He just thought it was the most amazing thing.
Did the teacher ever see it?
No. No. But so what happened was, so fast forward, it was a while. It was probably at least 5 years, close to 5 years later. This friend of mine had gone into becoming a computer programmer and had gotten hired at Access. And so they were getting into these story games, but he said, the quality of them wasn't great and they really needed someone who was really creative and a good writer. And I was the first guy he thought of, purely based on this little stupid thing I did in chemistry class. So he tracked me down. This was back before, internet and social media. So he had to track down my relative of mine who was able to get a hold of me. And then he and I met for lunch and he said, yeah, I work for this software company and you should come out and talk to him. I think you'd get along really well with Chris Jones. And so that's how that came to be.
Well, already in the Tex Murphy series, there'd been 2 titles. So when you started in 1994 on Under a Killing Moon, you'd probably had to look back at the older titles and think, how are we going to develop this character and actually, turn him into something significant?
Yeah, actually, they were still wrapping up Martian Memorandum at the time. And so I actually play a character in Martian Memorandum, and it's more, and the characters were, barely, you didn't have to have any acting ability. Some would argue you wouldn't have to have any acting ability to be in our games now, but
a lot of FMV studios had, their own staff that they would hire and people voicing games and stuff. It was quite a big practice in the industry back then.
It was. Well, with Martian Memorandum, there were only a few characters that actually spoke, and it was just a handful of lines. But they had me play a character mostly because of, I think, how I looked, because at the time I had really long hair and just had a kind of an unusual look that they thought would be good for one of the characters. So I actually was a character in there, but I didn't contribute in any way to the development of the game. And then they did Amazon, Guardians of Eden. And I kind of got involved with that, but more designing the hint system and documentation, not in the design of the game. And then at the end of that was when Chris invited me to work with him on the next Tex Murphy game, which ended up being Under a Killing Moon. So yeah, I had to play both Mean Streets and Martian Memorandum just to kind of get a feel for who Tex Murphy was and what had been done so far with the series in order to write the story for Under a Killing Moon. And so, for example, you had the Sylvia Linsky character that was in Mean Streets. And so I made her Tex's ex-wife at the beginning of Under a Killing Moon, just to kind of, give some texture to the story. And then, just changed Tex a little bit. He was kind of this Blade Runner-y guy, just an avatar basically in Martian. And I thought, let's take him old school here. And Chris was all for that. So we made some fairly significant, changes to the very little that had been done for Tex as a character in the 2 previous games. And really, I think most people associate who he is with how he was portrayed in Under a Killing Moon and the games that came after.
And like Martian Memorandum was kind of digitized actors, like kind of Mortal Kombat style. And Under a Killing Moon ended up being full FMV. So it must have been a complete change when you went to that kind of project.
Well, the Martian Memorandum characters, actually, we used actors with that. It's just they were heavily pixelated because of
Yeah.
the resolution on it. And it was on floppy, obviously, so we were really limited in how much space we had to work with there. So, yeah, but then you would see them in the environment, and those would be, digitally created characters. So, but yeah, once we went to at the time, it was black screen with the actual actors, it really represented a huge shift.
Well, you mentioned about Blade Runner before, and, playing Killing Moon. You can see stuff like, influences of obviously that and other sci-fi kind of stuff, and then film noir, even elements of it as well. I mean, was a whole crew kind of into that stuff then?
Chris Jones and I ended up being kind of the creative directors on this. And so, I think everybody else kind of just went along with it. I'm not sure if they loved it or not, but we did. He and I, we found that in addition to just getting along personally, we had a lot in common in the things that we enjoyed. So he and I are both film noir buffs and had seen, hundreds of movies from the 30s, 40s. And so I think he felt like he'd been kind of this film noir nerd and didn't really have anyone to talk about it with. And as soon as we met, we just hit it off. And I was like, oh yeah, I've seen that. And so we bonded over a lot of those classic movies. And then he and I both love science fiction and Blade Runner in particular. And we just thought that's kind of a fresh take on it. Blade Runner had obviously a lot of noir influence, but we took it back to kind of the 1940s detective in the futuristic world. And he and I we love that concept. And so we were very excited to go in that direction.
It was huge at the time as well, that kind of 40s detective vibe in tons of shows and everywhere. You don't see it so much nowadays, actually.
No, you don't. Well, and the other influence I would add to that. So you have Blade Runner for the sci-fi setting. You have the noirish stuff for Tex as a character. But yeah, there are other things like X-Files, because we love kind of the paranormal aspect. And so when you integrate that into the mix too, I think you get a pretty fresh, kind of new approach to it. Because when you're dealing with kind of the aliens in Pandora Directive and kind of the Nazi cult stuff, in Under a Killing Moon, you're really adding in kind of an X-Files dimension too. And X-Files to me was amazing. And so that was a big influence.
How different is screenwriting for a game, and what are the kind of considerations that are needed?
Well, the biggest issue is the interactivity, because with a movie or a book, the viewer or the reader is at the mercy of the creator, right? So when they're in the movie theater, they watch what you created. Whereas with a game, you have to accommodate the sense that they're actually driving the action. And so you have to create all of this content for them to experience, but you also want them to feel like they're having some influence over it, that it's happening as a result of the things that they do. And so when you're writing the story, you want to find that balance between telling a story and then making it feel like it's actually being driven by the player.
Well, as Ravi touched on before, I mean, back in those early days of FMV, a lot of the time it was just, staff around the offices that would do the characters. And they weren't known for good acting. How did you convince real actors to join then? And was there kind of a bit of a skepticism about, video games as a medium still at that stage for proper actors?
Absolutely. Yeah, it was a huge stigma to overcome because, in fact, it's probably still the case, is that real actors, in fact, back in the day, real actors were stage actors. They thought being in movies was kind of a sellout. And then movie actors were like, well, we'd never do TV. And then TV actors like, well, we'll never do video games. So we were way down the list, when we were trying to cast. And actually, I think we probably would have been content to just work with local people, local community theater type stuff. Obviously, we would have wanted to have some well-known actors because the cachet of an actual known actor got a lot of attention and publicity. Yeah, in the end, what happened was we had a casting agent, Katrina McGregor, who knew a whole bunch of people, and one of her closest friends was Margot Kidder. And so Margot Kidder happened to be in Utah because she and Russell Means, and they were going out together at the time, were doing a film down in southern Utah, and they were going to be flying out of the Salt Lake City airport, and they had like a day and a half before they were going to be leaving town. And Katrine said, "Hey, I work with these guys that are doing this, video game. Would you guys be interested in coming in and just doing a little cameo?"
And she was famously Lois Lane, wasn't she?
Lois Lane from Superman, yeah. And so she came in, and she was great because she was just like, "Yeah, let's do this." She didn't have any pretension at all about it, and because she did it, Russell Means came along and did it. I think he was a little more skeptical about it, but we were so loose and just having fun. I mean, it was such a fun time. The idea of putting these live actors into these digital backgrounds was still such a new thing. And whenever we'd get something composite, we'd be like, "Oh God, that looks so great," And so we were just a fun group to work with, and we were just kind of playing fast and loose. And so they came in and spent a day and a half with us, and we all just had a blast together. And then the whole James Earl Jones thing, which was such an amazing opportunity, that came about almost as a joke because we wanted to have a narrator for the game. And we're like, well, who would we want? Well, obviously James Earl Jones would be, my choice. And we all laughed about it and said, well, we should ask, And then as it turned out, we'd been in development for a while, and we'd gotten some pretty good press coverage, and turned out his son had heard about our game, and he said, "Dad, you got to do it." And so he did it, and we were just blown away by that. So, and then I don't remember how Brian Keith got into the mix, but so by that time, we had some recognizable name actors involved in this, and it kind of gave us a little bit of credibility.
And he's perfect for a narrator, isn't he? Wonderful.
He was amazing. It was so funny. So the agreement was that he'd do it for much less than his normal rate. But he said, "How much?" And we said, "Oh, a couple pages. And so I put together a script with all of his stuff, and I had the margins all the way out to the end, and I'm like, 10 points.
Small as fun. Yeah.
So technically it was on 2 pages, but it was probably about 10 pages of content. But luckily we'd made the decision to use some Edgar Allan Poe, Mask of the Red Death, as kind of a theme. And I think he really liked that, the kind of classic literature. So a lot of it is him quoting Poe, and then, throwing in the other stuff that was specific to the game. And so, yeah, he seemed to have a good time doing it.
Did he have an interest in the medium?
I don't think he had any interest at all. But I don't think he had any idea really what we were doing. All he knew is he was doing the voice work for some project.
Well, did you keep an eye on any kind of rival titles at the time? Because I think 7 Guests was out before, and Sierra were also doing like really huge things at the time.
Well, so our goal with Under Killing Moon, because we wanted it to be 3D, have a totally open world that you could walk through. And so our inspiration was, we said we would love to have the movement capability of Wolfenstein and then the graphic quality of Seventh Guest, because that kind of set the bar for the FMV at that point. And so, yeah, we were very much aware of that and keeping tabs on everything everyone was doing. And I thought Seventh Guest was great. Myst, I thought, was a really nice game that created a really nice immersive environment with really great graphics for the time. So those were all inspirations for us. We did keep an eye on other FMV games that came out, but most of them just were not very well done. And we were kind of like, this is kind of diluting the pool here, because we actually wanted other people to put out good games so that we could keep making games in this genre. And as it turned out, it was not to be.
Well, how important was like soundscapes and kind of catching the dialogue, making sure it was really clear, and also like the effects and incidental music and stuff that was going on?
We had a really wonderful audio guy named John Clark, and he had been childhood friends with Chris Jones and Doug Vandegrift, who was one of the artists. And so John was really a sound nerd. And so he was very good at getting good quality sound, and he would handle all the sound effects work. And so we were really just lucky to have someone who was very good at his job to do that for us. Nowadays, obviously, you have tools available to you that allow, pretty much anyone to be able to do a lot of that sound work. But there's still like a knack to it. You have to have the ear for it. So yeah, that's always been an important part. I'm not sure we understood how important it was at the time because we were so focused on the visuals, but that was still always a consideration.
Well, Under a Killing Moon, I mean, from memory, that came on 4 CD-ROMs.
It did.
And in 1994, I remember, most studios were still kind of getting to grips with what felt like the infinite storage of a single CD-ROM. I mean, was that like a kind of a hard sell to management then, that it's going to be on all these CDs? And did you have any difficulty even fitting it on that amount? I mean, because that seemed like a lot of data for the time.
Well, so when we first started development and made the decision, because initially we weren't going to do it for CD-ROM, because it still wasn't as widely available as we would have liked. It was still kind of new technology. And so we debated for the first few months whether we should just build it for floppy like had been done previously, or to just go for it with the CD-ROM. Obviously, I think we made the correct choice. But yeah, at the time we thought, how are we going to fill this CD? It's like there's so much space, and so we filled up the first one pretty quickly. And since Chris Jones was management, being the CFO, he just said, well, we're just going to do whatever it takes to get it done. The one thing I had to do was that one of my roles, it actually became the relationship Chris and I had as designers. He became more of an executive designer. And so he would have ideas and then he'd throw them to me and I would integrate them. But as far as the nitty gritty stuff like point systems, hint systems, that was all on me. And one of the things that I had to do was figure out how to allocate the data on the disks, so to minimize disk swapping, which obviously is a thing of the past. And I'm guessing some younger listeners won't even know what that is. But you would have to swap disks occasionally. And the problem was that if you were kind of bouncing around talking to people, if you got into that loop of I'm having to swap a disk every time I go somewhere, got really aggravating. And so I spent a lot of time figuring out how to minimize the disk swapping with that game.
Yeah, and I remember at the time my CD-ROM drive had a caddy as well, so it was even more hassle. I had to get that out and open it and everything.
Did it increase the price of the game much, having 4 CD-ROMs?
I can't say. I was never involved in the pricing part of things, but I do know that the AAA titles, which Killing Moon was, were going for about $100 retail, and that's what that one went for. So I'm not sure if it went up because of the CDs or if that was just the going rate.
Probably for 4 CDs, more value for money. I get a lot more game in there.
Yeah. Well, I do remember that I think we said you had to have a meg of RAM to play the game, but we really recommended 4. And at the time, that was, $200 a meg, so it was not cheap.
Yeah, so there was a big change when you went to the Pandora directive, which was like 1996. So technology must have moved on. And how did that kind of help in creating that game?
Well, RAM became more affordable. That was a big thing. And then just processing speed got a little bit faster. We used the same exact engine we'd used in Under Killing Moon. A lot of people are surprised by that. We just learned how to use it more effectively. And so the technical development between Killing Moon and Pandora wasn't that significant. We just got more out of what we had created for Under a Killing Moon.
And did having, good director and like well-known actors, did that kind of convince others that, FMV titles were to be taken more seriously? Did you kind of feel that change was coming?
Well, so Adrian Carr, who we brought in for the Pandora directive, just had an eye for composition, how to set up a scene and how to light it properly. Because Chris and I, we knew what we liked, mostly from, being noir fans, so we loved shadows and, stark contrast and things like that. But as far as composition of scenes, that was something that Adrian really brought to the table for us. And as far as the actors, so the three main actors that we had in Pandora, so Kevin McCarthy, Barry Corbin, and Tanya Roberts, they were legit. It's like Brian Keith in the day was a top actor, but it had been quite a while since he'd really done anything. Same with Margot Kidder. Russell Means wasn't really well known. Obviously, James Earl Jones was very well known, but he didn't actually appear in the games, just as a voice. So when we were able to get Kevin McCarthy in particular, who I just adored, he was an amazing man and such a good actor. And the fact that he appears in the intro of the game and in one of the first extended conversations and really sets up the entire story, he just brought this gravitas to the story, right? So here's this legit, classic, well-trained, well-known actor right at the beginning of the game, putting in a performance where he's really putting in an effort. He's not just phoning it in, and I feel like that really set the tone for the whole game. And then, Barry Corbin was fantastic, very menacing as the Jackson Cross character. And then Tanya Roberts was just beautiful and charming and was kind of a perfect femme fatale, and ended up being a really nice foil for the Chelsea character that we'd introduced in Killing Moon. And that love triangle between her character and Chelsea, played by Suzanne Barnes, and then Tex was, I think, kind of the magic of that game.
What was the balance of real sets and green screen like? Were you kind of rendering stuff easier, and was it easier to do virtual sets than in the first one?
I'm not sure I would say it was easier. It's just we had made that decision, that we were going to have all of the backgrounds be artificial and then composite in the live actor. It wasn't until the next game, Overseer, where we really started playing more with some sets and things like that. So what we would do here is if the scene required actual interaction with the actor, we found it was simpler to have that be an actual prop. So, for example, when Tex is in his office and he and his, the Kevin McCarthy's character in the opening scene, the chairs they're sitting on, the desks they're sitting at, are all rendered. But for example, in the very opening, or one of the very opening scenes, you have the murder scene where the girl's dead in bed. And we just thought we need to have her actually in a bed, because to be able to create a digital version of the bed and make it look convincing was going to be too difficult. So very little of actual real props in that game. We got more into that in the next game.
Well, the Pandora Directive, that kind of took a darker turn from the earlier games. And, some of it, particularly, the first couple of games felt a little bit tongue-in-cheek at times. I mean, did you want to turn it into more of a kind of serious and exciting series then? Was that change in direction conscious?
So when I played the first two games, which I hadn't been involved in, they were very jokey. And Mean Streets in particular, and not to cast aspersions on the creative forces behind it, but it was very kind of juvenile, a lot of kind of, I don't know, like junior high level jokes.
Yeah, we compared it to Leisure Suit Larry a bit earlier.
Yes, exactly. That's actually a perfect comparison. And, that's got its place, but I think ultimately we were working toward creating really an interactive movie. We wanted it to be just higher quality. And so even if we'd done a straight comedy, we'd want it to be, a really good comedy, as opposed to just kind of a jokey thing. So Under Killing Moon was all for laughs. I mean, there was a little bit of serious undercurrents in the story, but for the most part, we're playing it for laughs. In fact, probably our inspiration for the tone of that particular game was Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, the Steve Martin movie. And we loved that kind of just random humor. And it worked well, I think, for Under Killing Moon, because we weren't taking ourselves seriously. I think if we'd tried to do a really compelling, darker story with Under Killing Moon, we would have gotten roasted, because, the overall quality of the acting and the visuals and things just weren't up to that. And so we always felt like, hey, if we're laughing at ourselves, it's going to be hard for other people to pile on with us. And so I feel like that was definitely the right way to go with Killing Moon. But then once we got comfortable and we felt like we can take this up a level or two, I think Chris and I had always wanted to do something that was just, like I say, a little more noirish. There's always humor in our favorite noir. And we were, I guess, aiming for something more kind of Indiana Jones-ish. So it's got that kind of Saturday matinee feel to it, but it's very adventure-y. And I feel like Pandora really, really hit the mark with that. It didn't take itself totally seriously, but it was definitely a little darker, a little more serious than what we'd done in the past.
Well, we'll move on to Overseer in a bit, but I was first wondering, how much was DVD technology kind of pushed to you guys, and do you feel it didn't really deliver in the end? Everybody said it would be the future of gaming, DVD and interactivity, and it kind of turned into backstage footage and just a few extras.
Well, so the story, which has been well documented, of how Overseer came to be, was directly because we were approached by Intel, and Intel was pushing the DVD technology, and they said, hey, we'll fund the development of a game, but with some pretty significant restrictions, mostly on how long we would have to develop it. And so I had a whole other story that was going to go in a completely different direction as the sequel to the Pandora Directive. And so Intel comes along and says, hey, we'll pay for your next game, but you got to turn it out in a year. And for us, we'd done Pandora in a year and a half, and that was record time. But we were already planning on upgrading the engine, and so there were going to be a lot of changes that would take time. And so Chris Jones's idea was, well, let's update the Mean Streets story. And so he thought by already having kind of a basic plot that it would save us time developing it, and then we would have it be a little bit smaller game than what Pandora was. But as it turned out, I mean, I had to go back to Mean Streets, had to play through it a bunch of times, get familiar with it, and then honestly had to really rewrite it almost from scratch. And so there's the basic shell of the story that was in Mean Streets, but almost everything is completely rewritten in that. And so it didn't really save any time for me, but we were able to get it done in, a short enough time that it met with Intel's requirements. But it was not the game that we had intended to put out. And so as far as the DVD technology, I think it was fine. It was new technology, and we tried our best to build a game that would run with it. But in retrospect, honestly, even though I think Overseer's a really good game, I kind of wish that opportunity hadn't come up. I like to think about what would have happened if we'd had 2 years to do a game and had just done the story that I had intended to do following Pandora, which would have been pretty amazing, I think.
Well, as we got into the late 90s, obviously, 3D gaming really started to take off, and everyone started buying dedicated 3D graphics cards. I mean, did you see the popularity of adventure games and point and click and even FMV games start to drop off a bit when 3D gaming started to take off?
Yeah, absolutely. No question. And that was a big thing. So, we were a pretty successful little company, and at the end of the 90s, there was just a lot of consolidating going on in the video game industry. So you had some big players, Take-Two, Microsoft, Ubisoft, EA, and they were starting to absorb smaller companies who couldn't compete for the public's attention and shelf space, because, you were still buying your games in video game stores. And so it just became a matter of survival that in the end, you really couldn't stay in business for yourself if you weren't one of the big boys. And so Microsoft came along and made us a really nice offer. And so we ended up being bought by them, and their interest was exclusively in 3D games. They just didn't have any interest at that time in the old style adventure games. And so we lobbied hard for years with them to give us a chance to do a version of Tex Murphy, and we just couldn't ever get them to bite on it.
Well, they were working on projects like one that we've heard a few things about on this podcast, which was the Black Pearl with Mark Hamill. Were you involved in that at all, and knew what happened?
Yeah, actually, Mark and I actually became pretty good friends because we were collaborating on how to take his story and turn it into a video game story. In fact, I used to take him out to this bar in downtown Salt Lake called the Portical, and there was this it was a 3-level huge place, and there was this little area down in the lowest level back in the corner. It was a perfect place. It's where I did a lot of my writing, and so he and I would go down there. This is back in the day when people still smoked cigarettes, and he and I would go down there and drink and smoke and throw ideas around and do design and writing, and it was an awesome experience. But unfortunately, that was one of many projects that we put time in that ended up being canceled before they were released.
Because that was like a crime thriller, and it was also created by Mark Hamill, and a comic book series as well. So.
Yeah, so it was Dark Horse, I think, was the it was the graphic novel line. And I don't know if he did multiple graphic novels of it, but I saw the initial one, and it was very much in line. I mean, nowadays it would probably get picked up and made for Netflix because you have so many of these kind of DC and Marvel type stories, and this was very much in that vein. Really good story. Mark's very creative, funny guy, and the story he wrote was excellent. And I think it would have made a wonderful game. But Microsoft had so many things going on at that time. They also, one of the other projects they had was the tie-in with the AI movie that Spielberg directed. And I worked on a script for an adventure game for that as well. And unfortunately, when the movie came out, I'm not sure if it was just not what Microsoft was expecting or it wasn't successful enough, but we had a number of games in development at Microsoft and they were all canceled.
I'm quite interested in, because I've read about the Black Pearl. I mean, kind of how far along was that? And is there kind of any surviving elements of that game anywhere? Like, have you got an old hard disk in the attic with any of it on there still?
I don't have anything, but I'm sure there is content around somewhere. We had a few people that were pack rats that would just, once people were done with it, they just put it in a box and take it home. Yeah, we had done a lot of work. So the whole script was done. I'd also been the designer on it. And so I'd done most of the game design and we were well into development. We had probably a third of the game done when they pulled the plug on it. So
yeah, it'd be great if that surfaced one day.
I'll have to ask around. I don't know. We've kind of scattered to the winds over the years, but I'm sure somebody has something somewhere.
Well, have you noticed, over recent years, I mean, there's obviously been a big interest in, retro gaming, hence our podcast and similar ones. But have you noticed a revival in point-and-click adventures and, adventure games in general and FMV titles in recent years? Have they kind of come back in vogue, particularly in, like, the indie gaming scene?
Yes, absolutely. So when I was actively designing the Tex Murphy games during the 90s, I spent a lot of time playing other people's games, as much just to kind of see what was going on out there. Once we got into the 3D games, I kind of lost interest in gaming. And even though I continued to work in the industry and, worked on a whole bunch of different games, I just found that as I got older, I was just less interested in what was going on. Every once in a while, a game would come out that would catch my attention. Uncharted was one of them. But of course, that's, again, I feel like kind of a natural evolution of what Tex Murphy would have been if we'd been continuing to make games. But that was, and Red Dead Redemption was another one that I just loved. In fact, all the Rockstar games are fantastic. I did play LA Noire. That was another great one. But by and large, I kind of just lost interest in general. And it wasn't until, I guess, maybe the last 6 or 7 years. So we have still a very active Tex Murphy fan community. And I've met a bunch of these people. I'm friends with a bunch of them. And one friend in particular, Fred Buer, who lives in Norway, is a really avid gamer. And he and I stay in pretty frequent contact. And so he actually keeps an eye out for games that he thinks would interest me. And so he'll point one out and then I'll go check it out. And I've just seen a lot of these old style point and click games starting to really get some traction. One, Gemini Rue, came out a few years ago and I looked at it like, wow, this is going back to Martian Memorandum, really, going with this kind of real 8-bit look, even though that's an intentional, aesthetic choice. They could obviously make it, it kind of reminds me of South Park, right? Where they make it look rough, even though it's hard to do. So there've been a whole bunch of the Wad Jedi games, are all kind of in that same vein of the point and click where there's just a lot of emphasis on the story. And I love that. I mean, I think maybe it's just from the era that I, fell in love with video games, but I love seeing a resurgence in that kind of retro style of gaming.
Well, talking of a resurgence, you guys did a Kickstarter and it was absolutely amazingly successful. And you created the Tessa effect. So what was it like kind of working after 16 years back on Tex Murphy? And did you have to get back into the vibe and kind of learn a few things about him again?
Well, that was a really interesting situation for me personally, because at the time I was with Electronic Arts and I was a senior designer on The Sims. And obviously that's a huge conflict of interest. Most video game companies, especially the big ones, do not like you contributing to another video game company. And so I actually had to apply to get permission to provide the script for that game. And I had to convince them that I basically had the script done and that I could just hand it off. That wasn't totally true. There was still a lot that had to be done to make it work. One of the which is that we were using actors who were now 15 years older than they were in the last game. And so it required us, at least for me, it required for the story to jump into the future. in order to not, like if literally if we picked up from the last scene of Overseer and all of a sudden everyone's 15 years older and we don't even bother to try and explain it, that would be a little weird. So I had to kind of change the story around to move them into the future, and that required, a pretty significant amount of new writing. And then that was kind of it. And I don't know how, God bless the people in HR at EA, but they actually allowed me to appear with some of the promotional stuff for the Kickstarter. I still can't believe they let me do that, which was wonderful. But yeah, that was kind of the extent of my involvement in the development of that game. And so I gave them the script and then went back to my job. And as it turned out, Chris, as happens during development, you have to sometimes make some big changes. You have to, scale down the original vision. And unfortunately, I wasn't there to help with, editing and rewrites and things like that. So I wish I could have been, because that was kind of my primary role when I worked with Chris on the previous games. But I think overall, the fans were very happy with how Tesla turned out. And after, kind of patiently waiting for almost 2 decades to get a sequel, I think it was actually a really great experience for people.
Well, there's been some remasters as well, and some of the quality of them are great. What did you think when you first saw that footage, and did it kind of help originally filming on 16mm?
So you're talking about the Pandora Directive. Yeah. So the thing with the Pandora Directive, so that came out in 96, as you mentioned. So now it's been 26 years, technically. Chris and I always felt like that was, for the time, it was the very best game we were capable of producing. We felt like, the combination of the story, the gameplay, the actors we had in, where we were with the technology at that time, just really delivered on the promise of what an interactive movie could be. And by its very nature of having been created in the mid-90s, there were huge limitations, on what we could do graphically in particular. And so I think we'd always kind of in the back of our minds thought maybe someday we'll do a remaster of it. But we also felt like how much, it isn't like a film where it's just on the film. I mean, we had to kind of scale everything down so it would run on a computer back then. So it was really amazing to us when we went back to the original tapes with the video of the actors on it. And then Matt Van Roon, who's been doing a ton of work on this project, went and got them remastered, and they came out looking almost like they could have been done today, which was almost miraculous, I think. And so when we're looking at the quality difference between what was in the game in 96 and what we're seeing now, it's really just stunning. But that's the only one we've done any remastering on. So as far as the other games, we'll have to see. But Pandora just holds a special place for us, and so it was the one that we would want to do the remaster of.
Well, there was meant to be a follow-up to Tesla Effect, the Poison Pawn, which I know you were involved with as well, that I did read officially kind of got put on hiatus or cancelled only last April. I mean, what was kind of the story there, and where does that lie at the moment then?
Well, this is kind of a delicate subject because it began as one thing and then kind of became another thing. The original idea was simply that you had a handful of very talented Tex Murphy fans who asked us for permission to create their own basic fan update of Overseer, for the same reasons that we're doing the Pandora remaster. It's just, really cool game, great story, all of that, but a lot of it's kind of dated with the technology. And so we said, yeah, go ahead. And then they started producing stuff. We went, wow, that looks amazing. This doesn't have to just be a fan-made game. This could be like a full-on, remaster and release it as a real game. And then there was kind of this transition, kind of an awkward transition between it just being a little passion project to now actually being an organized, structured project. And I think it just kind of got a little uncomfortable for some of the people involved, where it wasn't something necessarily they wanted to sign on to do something bigger like that. And we may have come across too strong, or maybe, just who we are as the creators of the series, that they felt like obligated to do what we told them, even though they weren't comfortable with it. So anyway, there was some miscommunication about it, and in the end, we just basically relinquished back to them and said, just do what you want with it. Go back to your original thing, and we'll definitely support you in that, and we'll kind of back away from being actively involved in it. And honestly, I don't know where it is at that point or at this point, because it's really just back on those original guys to either do it or not.
Well, another thing that people can check out as well is the series of novels that you've done. And do they differ a little bit from the game, being in novel form?
Yes. So there's kind of an interesting story behind that, in that so I had done the story for Under a Killing Moon, and it was my first game I'd worked on, first story for a game. And so I'd come up with this this epic story, it's just massive. And so I give it to Chris to read, and he's like, well, this is wonderful. There's no way in hell we can do even 10% of this. So he's like, go back and, really scale it down. And then once it's kind of to the scope that's more manageable, then we can go with that. So I had this original idea. And then, so we make the game and move on to Pandora. And I learned so much in the process of creating Under a Killing Moon. And I thought, I really need a very well-defined story for this next game for Pandora. And so I decided to write it in the way I'm comfortable, which was basically as a novel. And so I started just writing the story as a novel, and I was, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 chapters into it. And then the plan would be that I would then cull the story out of the novel. And I was approached by a company called Prima Publishing. And there were so many games coming out in that time period that were really heavy on story. They wanted to start a line of fiction based on popular video games. And so, because Killing Moon had gotten so much publicity, they reached out to me and said, would you be interested in doing a novelization of Under a Killing Moon? I said, I would, but I actually am writing a novel for the sequel. Do you want to see what I've got? And they said, yes. So I sent the chapters I'd written for Pandora, and they said, we love it. Let's sign a 2-book deal. They said, go ahead and finish the Pandora novel. We'll publish that first, and then we'd like you to go back and do a novelization of Under a Killing Moon. So that's what happened. The Pandora directive novel actually came out before the game did. And the story in Pandora, the novel, is very close to what's in the game, obviously. The only difference being that the game had the 3 different narrative paths, and the book could only tell one of them. And so the book basically has kind of the default path, kind of the middle path. And then I went back and did the novelization of Killing Moon, which allowed me to actually bring in a lot of story elements that I had in my original idea that weren't, manageable for the game. And so the Pandora novel is very close to the game. Under Killing Moon novel is very different from the game. So with Tesla Effect, it was a very similar thing, was that I had kind of the basic outline of the story, and I started writing the novel, and then I had to separate from the development of the game. And so the second half of the Tesla Effect game is very different than the book, because we were on 2 completely different paths. And so it's been really interesting to have people that have both read the book and play the game give their take on just how different the stories ended up going. So yeah, there are pretty significant differences between at least 2 of the books and the games.
Well, you can get hold of the paperback, the ebook, and there's audiobook versions of your Tex Murphy novels as well on your website, aaronconnors.net, which I'll put in our show notes as well if people want to go and check those out. I mean, have you got plans to do any more then? Is there anything else coming up?
Yes. And by the way, thank you for the plug. So yeah, I love audiobooks because I have to commute quite a bit, and it's nice to be able to just throw an audiobook in to listen to. And so I thought it's a pretty big market, especially with the Audible, Audible becoming quite popular. And so I ended up creating audiobook versions of these books, which had been written way back in the mid 90s. And those audiobooks didn't come out until, 2015 or so. So now my plan is to have an audiobook version of any book that I publish. So I have 4 of them. Tex Murphy and the Poisoned Pawn was the 4th novel. And that was, for anyone who doesn't know, it's basically the story of Overseer, but told within a different framing narrative. So for people who've played the Overseer game, they know that the game takes place after the Pandora Directive, but the story that is told by Tex is from way back in his past. And so with the Poisoned Pawn, I actually tell the story now 7 years after he told it the first time in the Overseer game. I know this is sounding really complicated, but basically it takes the story into the future, but then still tells the old story from years in the past. So it's similar to Overseer in some ways, but very, very different in the context of it. So there's one book that I am in the middle of writing right now, which is called Tex Murphy and the Romanov Enigma. And that tells the story of what happened. For people who are Tex Murphy fans, they'll know this. There's a 7-year gap in the arc of the story where we know almost nothing about what happened during that time period. And this story kind of fills that gap. And then there's kind of a series finale story, because we still need to kind of bring everything together in a big finish. And so I have 2 books for sure, one that's half done and then one more to come. And so at the very least, there'll be 6 books in the series. And then I've had a bunch of people ask if I would do a novelization of the Martian Memorandum story. And I also have 2 other smaller stories that I've written. And so maybe I would do one book that just has 3 little novellas in it. And so that's kind of what I have for the future.
It's great that the Tex Murphy kind of universe is getting expanded into so many different things. I love the idea of doing more audiobooks as well. I'm the same. I can, driving around or being on a plane or just even when you're on, holiday, walking around with your earphones in, listening to audiobooks. It's just such an easy way to consume these stories. And the hours just fly by as well. So I think that's a really good idea. And as I mentioned, I'll link up your website in our show notes so people want to keep an eye on you, on the progress of those projects. Aaron, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing some of your stories with us this week.
Thanks for having me. It's been a real pleasure.